You're listening to the Guys Who Do Stuff podcast.
Welcome to the Guys Who Do Stuff podcast. I'm Rinky Dinky Moho. And this.
Joe. Yeah.
Hi, Joe.
Yeah. Hey.
Hi, I'm Rinky Dinky Moho.
Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Today we have Dr. William Porter on the show.
Yeah. Dr. William Porter is an author local to our area. Considers himself to be an entrepreneur.
Yes, he does. He said it has to be that way, right? When you're an author, you're also an entrepreneur. Is that something he's... Yeah.
That is what he said.
That is what he said, but this is the introduction, right?
Yes, it is.
Crap. But that's okay because you have a great... Fasten your seatbelt because Dr. Porter is going to take you on a ride. Oh, Dr. B's in the house today. On the podcast, we don't mess around.
You're listening to the Guys Who Do Stuff podcast. Get unstuck, tell a better story, and have a good answer to the question, what are you doing today? Do this stuff.
All right. Well, welcome to the podcast today. I'm Joe. I was going to say that I was you. I was looking at you. Let's just switch today.
Let's switch.
I'm
Go.
Josh.
And I'm Joe.
Coffee.
Yummy.
We're really excited today in the studio. We've got Dr. William Porter joining us on the Guys Who Do Stuff podcast.
Dr. P.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. We know you because we're in a networking group with you, and you're an awesome guy. You're an author. The first thing I think about, Lori asked me who was on the podcast, and I said, Dr. William Porter, and I was telling her a little bit about you. But I love the way when you're doing your little talk at the BNI that you refer to yourself as an entrepreneur. I just never thought of it that way before, that authors are actually entrepreneurs.
Well, I never thought of it either before I became an author.
Yeah.
But I belong to another group in Raleigh. I don't know if you're familiar with the City Club of Raleigh, but anyway, we have an authors group, a small group of people, about 5 to 10 people meet every month.
Yeah.
And we talk about how we go about furthering our business, because we look at being an author as being a business.
Yeah.
And so, but in general, I don't think a lot of people look at professional writing and being an author as being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I think it is. I think it's a good way to look at it too.
Yeah.
And
So what kind of doctor? How'd you get the doctor name?
Well, I did go to school. I was I always wanted to be a teacher, even when I was small. I had a vision of standing in front of a group of people with the tie on. And I go way back. I came up in the 50s and the 60s. And during that time, it was the time when television first came out. But anyway, I always had a vision of teaching. I guess my parents talked about it a lot. My parents didn't have a lot of formal education. They didn't graduate from high school, for example. But they always talked to me about getting more education than they got.
so were you the first person in your family to go to college? Your immediate family anyways, but
I was one of the first. Actually, my brother went to college. He went to the military. He's a little older than I am, with the encouragement from my parents and the motivation from my parents that I was going to get an education as well. I looked at him as a positive role model as far as me going in that direction. So ultimately, I ended up going to college too. He actually studied Spanish because of his experience in the military. I didn't go that route. I actually studied geography. I always wanted to travel, loved to travel. And I always especially wanted to study about different kinds of places. And so that gave me the internal motivation to study. But I didn't know if that formal course of study was available until I got to college. Actually, it was my second year in college before I found out that geography was available as a discipline that I could get into and study. And so that's what I did.
So what was your early home life like?
Well, as I said, I grew up in Rocky Mount, by the way, which is about an hour east of Raleigh.
Is that a small town?
It's a small town in the eastern part of the state. And for your information, I'm 69 years old.
69.
And so I came up, as I said, in the 50s. But I remember experiences in my childhood vividly. One was Hurricane Hazel back in 1954. I'm sure you all weren't around at that time.
Well, we've heard about it.
But you heard about it, Hurricane Hazel, a very damaging hurricane. And I remember all of the family being in the house. I have some cousins that live about 3 or 4 blocks from where we live, but they didn't have television back in those days in the early 50s. And so I remember all of my cousins coming around to our house. It was a very bad situation. And the other thing was our house got burned to the ground, actually. This was later on.
I thought it was like during the hurricane. I was like, wow, that's bad.
Well, actually, that was about maybe 8 years after the hurricane. I believe it occurred in 1962. And actually, this experience, as well as the hurricane, and other experiences, are in the book, my most recent book, Miracles in the Lives of Ordinary People. But anyway, that was a tremendous, traumatic experience. And,
how many brothers and sisters did you have, Dr. Porter?
I did have a younger brother, but he came on a little later. And I had a sister, though. But she passed. When I believe it was 10 years old. I was 10 years old. She was 8 years old when she passed. And it was kind of interesting because she was ill. And I remember just as it was yesterday, how she passed, as a matter of fact, and when she passed. We went to school together in the first, second grade, third grade, first and second grade. And but after that time, of course, it was just me in the house with my parents. And 2 or 3 years later, again, our house burned down, and that was another traumatic.
What was the
situation.
sickness that you lost your sister to?
It was meningitis, I believe.
Yeah. You guys were young and close.
It was tough. It was, again, a traumatic experience. And at that particular time, though, as a child, I didn't understand a lot about death, like most people don't understand about death, especially when it happens close to you. My whole frame of reference back in those days was that we are all physical beings and didn't recognize the fact of our totality is spirit as well as physical. But I only considered her physical being. And especially I remember the funeral service and looking at her in the casket, and she looked obviously pale and lifeless, and she was, but I did not consider the fact that her spirit was released basically at that time. I didn't have that kind of spiritual awareness.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, it was very traumatic. It was a very sad situation.
Do you remember much at 10 years old about how your parents reacted?
My mother reacted my mother reacted very, I don't know how to put it, but I remember lying on a couch in the same room where my sister was, and the doctor said that she was gone, or she's going, and she was dying. And when it finally happened, I heard my mother started crying. She ran out of the house, up and down the street, saying that, oh, she's gone, she's gone, she's gone.
Your parents now, it's you and your parents from 10 years old on. What was your relationship like with your folks?
It was a good relationship. I respected my father. Obviously, I respected my mother. My mother was a homemaker. My father worked at the local railroad yard. My father didn't want her to work. He wanted to be the breadwinner. So it was that kind of mentality back in those days.
He worked at the railroad station. I'm just trying to think, you guys grew up in Rocky Mount? It must have been a huge sacrifice for your parents to encourage you to seek higher education, knowing what the price tag on that would be.
Well, again, they wanted me to get the education that they didn't get.
Right.
Because of various reasons. I still don't know exactly why my mother didn't get the education that she could have gotten. As I said, she didn't finish high school. My father didn't finish high school. But my father had 4 other siblings, and he had to, I do know this, he had to support them.
Yeah.
And again, back in those days, the person or the sibling that was able to support in whatever way possible the other siblings did just that, and that's what he did. The other thing that happened when I was small coming up was the fact that we all went to church. When Sunday came around, we would call a local taxi, and then we would spend the morning in church, and then after church, we would come back, and usually our pastor would take us back. And it wasn't the fact that I really wanted to go to church, but I went because my parents wanted me to go, and our pastor was a fire and brimstone type pastor. And my mother was very demonstrative in church. I've always been kind of laid back.
Was your dad that way too?
My father was more laid back. So in that sense, I guess I took more after my father. And speaking of my father, he was not as demonstrative as my mother, but he did read the Bible a great deal. I remember after working during the week, when he came home on Fridays, his father, my grandfather, used to come by our house. And I remember hearing both of them talk about biblical subjects a great deal. The interesting thing was that they also partook of a lot of wine. And so it was kind of interesting. Again, I didn't understand all of the dynamics of that kind of situation, but I do remember scriptures like the strong must bear the infirmities of the weak. And in my father's house, there are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you. And a lot of other scriptures that they talked about that I really didn't understand at the time. But of course, I continued to go to church with them, and until high school, and I left, and that's when basically I didn't go to church as much after I left high school. I went to college. I guess I wanted to experience other things. I finally got away from the tutelage of my parents. So So,
what year did you go to college?
I started college in 1967 during the height of the civil rights movement in America.
How was that? What challenges did you face being a man of color and going for higher education?
Well, there were a lot of challenges. Even earlier on, I mentioned that my father worked on the railroad, and we used to have a pass. He had a pass for us to travel on the train.
Okay. So they gave like a pass to the employees.
Yeah. There was a colored section, and there was a white section. And of course, we went into the colored section. Again, I didn't have an understanding of that.
As a young man, did that seem like injustice to you, or did that just seem like that's just the way it works? That's what everybody's doing?
Seemed like that's simply the way it was. I remember my father, for example, working for our insurance man, which was a white gentleman. He because he was very nice, but later I found out that some things could have been a lot better. In other words, sometimes being nice is not the best thing. Being fair is the best thing. And so it was kind of a subservient kind of relationship, but it's one that everybody understood that that's basically the way it was. And so, but it wasn't until I got to college, again in 1967, when we had the civil rights activities and the demonstrations, that I came to understand what various injustices there were when I was coming up.
Yeah.
And there's just a whole lot of things that you have to overcome. And gradually I did, fortunately, overcome those things. And I knew I had to get a higher level education in order to teach, certainly in a college, because I really wasn't interested in teaching in high school. And again, I didn't really know what I wanted to major in. I majored in sociology. I then majored in psychology, and I found that psychology was too difficult. I didn't like that subject. And then I saw a classmate of mine who was really kind of a rowdy person during my freshman year. But by the time I had become a sophomore, I ran into him one day, and he showed me his report card, and it had all A's. And
so he was doing something right in the rowdiness.
Well, he was doing something right. And in addition to that, he told me what he had enrolled in. And those grades came from a geography curriculum.
And you were like, if this guy can do it.
And I can do it.
And you're like, I'm going to do that, but I'm not going to be rowdy. Imagine the places I'll go.
Exactly. But I did find out that, lo and behold, geography was really what I wanted to major in all along. But up until that time, I never knew that subject was in existence on the campus. And so I went immediately to the chairperson, enrolled in the geography department, and the rest is history.
Are you still friends with the rowdy guy?
As a matter of fact, he turned out to be a lawyer.
Did he really?
Yeah, and I think he lives in Virginia someplace.
That makes sense. Most rowdy people become lawyers.
I think that's how it works, yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of academic freedom or not, but teaching, especially at the college level, you're given some classes to teach and at various times, and that's basically what your responsibility is to teach at those times. And of course, you're expected to keep office hours and to go to committee meetings. Mm-hmm. And I like that idea because it wasn't a matter of going to a place and sitting at a desk for, say, 7 or 8 hours. I didn't like that.
So academic freedom means like these are your responsibilities, and how you spend the rest of your time is up to you.
Exactly.
Were your parents able to see you become a professor? What was their reaction to that?
They did. As a matter of fact, my family came out to when I got my master's, and this was in Kansas, by the way. Mm-hmm. I got my master's at Kansas State University, and everybody came out, and they were thrilled. They were thrilled, and so I have the same mentality, of course, since working at my alma mater. And when I got my master's, you have to have a master's to teach at the college level. I went back to Central, North Carolina Central, and began to teach in the very department that I graduated from 2 years earlier.
Oh, what was that like? Were there still people there that like, I recognize you. You're the teacher now?
Well, as a matter of fact, when I was a freshman, as I said, that was a very volatile period. And a lot of my classmates, unfortunately, didn't make it. It was the time of the Vietnam War. My first class, I think it was a world geography class. It had about 30, 35 people in it. Mm-hmm. And but when I walked into class for the first time, I realized that about 7 or 8 of those students were my former classmates. Most of that particular group actually had gone into the military, had come back to take advantage of their GI Bill.
Oh, okay.
Which, if you're familiar,
so they'd served a little bit in the military, and then they were able to get their education paid for.
And they ended up in my class, one of the classes that they took. But the thing is that I was thinking that I would have a lot of problems with them because I knew what they were like when we all came to school together. Yeah. But they were the nicest students in the world. I didn't have any problems with them at all. Wow. And that was it. They had gone apparently through a transformation.
The transition into becoming an author. So you retired from your career as a professor?
So what I decided to do was to write about people's experiences, especially miraculous kinds of things that happen to people from time to time because of my experience and my background in church going way back. And because along the way, I've heard a lot of experiences.
Yeah, so not just the Bible teaching, but the stories, real stories you've heard from people along the way, right? About miraculous events. Yeah.
Exactly.
So inspired by things. Yeah,
exactly. But it all started actually with our daughter. She came home one day and said, Daddy, guess what? I ran out of gas. And I said, well, what? And with her being totally out of gas, she was able to navigate with, in her opinion, the help of God to the service station. And so she declared that God helped her. It was a divine intervention kind of thing. And so I said, well, why not write a story about that? And so from that point, I began to write other stories, short stories, non-fictional stories about people's experiences that they indicated happened to them. And
this has been the topic of most of your books now, right?
You're right. That's what I write about. I write about people's experiences that you can't explain other than by a divine influence. At least that's what many people believe.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how do you define a miracle?
Great question, Joe.
Well, it's kind of interesting because in my latest book, Miracles in the Lives of Ordinary People, one of the first things I talk about is the definition of a miracle. Basically, it's a surprising event that's inexplicable. You can't rationalize it, but it's something that's good that's happened to you. And so that would be a miracle, whether it's being healed of a medical situation, getting a job that you didn't expect to get, or anything else that may have happened to you that is very difficult to explain or cannot be explained naturally, but in fact has happened. And it happened for your benefit. So that's what I would refer to as a miracle.
Yeah. How do you feel, or do you ever get questions about people saying like, that doesn't sound like a miracle. That just sounds like a regular thing.
Yeah. Anti-miracleism.
Anti-miracleism.
What's up with that?
So you've written a lot about people in their stories, about what they believe to be miraculous. What do you think are some of the common threads that you notice in those stories of people that choose to view the things that happen in their life as some kind of intervention by God or like a good surprise versus people that just think about things as, well, that's just a consequence?
Well, I think that being a scientist, I'm not an active scientist now, but when I was active in science, we did experiments. And a simple way of putting it, if you do an experiment, say 95, 96, 97 times out of 100 times, and you have the same thing show up, then there's something there. It suggests a valid relationship.
Right.
And so that's the way I look at miracles and the fact that these people are sincere when they believe that a miracle did happen to them. And I happen to believe that it was divinely orchestrated, because when you hear these things over and over and over again, it suggests that something is going on.
That's interesting, because like you came from a science background to be spending this portion of your life writing about like miracles and spirituality seems like a dissonant thing. Like that doesn't seem like the way most people would be spending their time. But to hear you equate it to your kind of training in the scientific background of knowing like, hey, this is a pattern. There's something to this, as opposed to, I think what a lot of scientists would view it as, well, it's just a coincidence. And you're saying, no, too many coincidences mean that there's got to be more, and more investigation is necessary into the cause of these repeatable patterns that seem to be coming up in the lives of people.
Exactly. And in that sense, I think that science, a knowledge of science really has helped me to understand the validity of some of these otherwise unbelievable kinds of experiences. Because, again, it's valid scientifically when, again, you conduct an experiment and something happens 95, 98% of the time. It
if you can
suggests
duplicate the results. Yeah.
And the same thing, as I said, is true as far as spiritual kinds of things.
When thinking back over your life, the way that you grew up, the situation you grew up in, the career you chose, now what you're doing, can you think of growing up? Was there an event that happened that that kind of either foreshadowed what you're doing now, affected your life in some way today, or still affecting your life, that kind of got you into the mode of becoming an author?
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, it was when my sister passed, when you come to an understanding that the physical body is driven by what some in the faith calls the real you. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's the spirit that drives and makes the body functional. And that's what I did not consider. And so when I left the cemetery after the morticians had placed my sister's body in the ground, you have weird kind of thoughts, especially about death when you're young. I was saying to myself, wow, she's in the ground and it's cold there, because I think it was April when she passed. And so I was really concerned about that, being her brother. I mean, leaving her in the ground. But I was considering only her physical body. And the fact of the matter is, now I understand that her spirit was released when she passed. But the fact of the matter is that even now, over 60 years, my sister still lives. Now, again, I can't explain that, but it's just something that you have to believe. Be willing to believe.
Do you think that as an author, and you're working on another book right now?
I'm working on my fourth book. It will be a sequel of the second book, Heaven Can't Wait.
How many books do you plan on writing?
It depends on how long we are talking about the physical body, how long I'm around physically.
Do you use an old school typewriter?
No. Well, I don't. Do they still exist?
What's your method? What's your preferred?
The new school typewriter. That is a computer.
Use a laptop.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. And I actually freehand a lot.
Yeah.
I don't. Some authors, I understand, use the computer, the laptop, and write that way. Well, to me, it's not really writing. That's using the laptop. But I actually literally write.
You also teach workshops for authors, correct?
I offer workshops for people who would like to become authors. But the workshops that I conduct are those that require basically individual guidance.
Yeah.
And I can teach or instruct to a larger group as well, but usually it's individualized instruction. Anyone who would like to have a greater knowledge of how to write a book, or maybe if you need to write a pamphlet or just writing in general, I think I can help a lot.
Do you help with writer's block?
I think so. As a matter of fact, from the standpoint that I don't necessarily want to write all the time.
Yeah.
But I know that that's what I do. And sometimes I have to sit down and start to write something, even though I might not want to write at that particular time.
Yeah, just kind of get you into it.
So that things will flow. And it's kind of interesting, too, when I do that. In many cases, I end up writing 5, 6, 7, 10 pages of material. And the idea is just to start. In order to succeed, you have to begin. Even this situation here that you all are doing. I mean, you might go through some mistakes, and you might have to do some correction.
Yeah. Do you have a happy place, like a geographical place that you like to go, like walk in the woods or driving around, or late night at IHOP? What's your place? Happy place
to write
for inspiration?
For inspiration,
yeah, for inspiration. Like physically, where do you like to go?
It's not a particular place, although I think usually early in the morning is a very good time just to pray, to reflect, to think about what you're going to do during the day.
What's kind of any weapons of choice you could pass on to people that are writing? You said mornings are great. Priming the pump. I think that's a great example. I think that translates too for people that aren't authors. Are there any other kind of weapons of choice that you could pass along for people, or tips?
I would say whatever does it for you.
Yeah.
I know this is what I tell my daughter sometimes, and I might not do it that way. It might not work for me, but as long as it works for you, it'll give you more success.
Yeah. The idea of writing a book seems daunting. Like writing a book, I put in a similar category with running a marathon or doing something huge. I'm just curious, have you always been like an ambitious type person? You just want to do something big?
I don't know. I think the spirit, again, I keep coming back to the spirit because that's within each one of us, and the spirit guides you.
Did you try a bunch of stuff before you decided to be an author in retirement?
Well, I tell you what, I thought about what I might want to do. I thought about being a greeter at Walmart. I thought about being a substitute teacher. Things tend to happen the way they're supposed to happen. They're not necessarily the way you would orchestrate things because, as I said earlier, God pretty much orchestrates everything, whether we believe it or not. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to like everything that happens and we're going to feel good about everything that happens. Just like my sister passing, I mean, I could have been the one who passed, maybe talking to my sister, maybe instead of talking to me. Things happen and we don't understand a lot that happens, but we just have to believe.
Well, that's really cool. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. If you want to find out more about Dr. William Porter, you can go to williamporterlife.com. That's where you can find out about his books and a little bit more information about him.
The new book is coming out over the summer, and it's going to be a sequel, as I said earlier, of the second book, Heaven Can't Wait. And it's about relationships. I don't think I mentioned what that particular book is about. It's a fictional book. It's about relationships. This young lady is trying to find her proverbial heaven on earth, but she has a lot of pitfalls, a lot of things that she has to deal with. So I'm real excited about that.
Yeah.
I have a radio program, 881 The Truth. It's a webcast, I believe. It's 6 o'clock on Monday mornings from 6 to 6:30, storytelling time. And the past few months, I've been reciting stories in Heaven Can't Wait.
William, we love you and appreciate you.
Thank you.
Do this stuff.
Yeah, we're going to wrap this up.
You cannot rap again.
Oh.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode with Dr. Porter.
We do appreciate you tuning in with us.
Yeah, one of the things that sticks out to me about Dr. William Porter is his perseverance.
Oh, yeah.
Like, even in the show at one point, he was like, well, I was either going to be like a greeter at Walmart or I was going to author books.
Yeah. Tenacity.
Yeah, tenacity, perseverance, sticking with it. And here's a guy that already had a successful career.
Yeah.
And then decided to launch a whole new one.
Yeah. My nickname for him has been Dr. P, but I think I'm going to call him Tenacious P now.
Oh, that's good.
You like that?
Tenacious P.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just waiting for his Jack Black.
Yeah.
As a part of their...
He's really like a fine wine. I mean, he just keeps getting better, doesn't he? He's 69 now and he's in this zone writing 3 books already. And
and a very encouraging man. Just
very encouraging.
He's always interested in what you're doing. And
yes.
Great guy to be around.
The kind of guy you want to be like when you're 69, which is not far away for us, Joe.
Well, probably not.
Yeah.
Wait, this life has been flying past.
Yeah, that's true. We got to slow it down. Take more naps.
Take more naps.
Not together, though. Just want to be clear about that.
All right.
All right. Dr. Porter, we love you.
We love making this stuff for you. You can help us out by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. Get unstuck, tell a better story, and have a good answer to the question, what are you doing today?